There's a kind of a big deal going on, and it's been going on for the last couple of years, an argument about whether we should sell games up front, paying them, premium games as they call them, or whether we should make games free, make them available to everybody, and sell them things inside the experience. Unfortunately, it's the wrong argument. And now, I'm partly to blame. I have to admit it. I have been a free-to-play advocate for a very long time, and still am. But it's the wrong conversation. What the real conversation is about is whether we do services or whether we make complete products that we sell, fire off, and forget. And if you think about that, the traditional games industry used to get everything ready, put it onto a gold disc, electronic material here. You know, we're writing code and we're putting it onto a disc and then we're selling it as a physical product in a shop. What's wrong with this picture? In a digital age, they were still selling things on a physical piece of plastic rather than using the digital distribution which the media is so perfectly designed for. So, is there still a case for making a game as a product? Is it always the case that we should make games as services or free or whatever? Well, what I want to try and do is show you that it's a bit of a messy picture. So we could look at some data. We could look at, say, XCOM. So XCOM, interesting paid game, $19.99, so quite an expensive thing. And actually, because it's got such brand value, it's not surprising it didn't do too badly. You know, really quite high in the charts. You can't really see because of the sort of blurriness of blowing things up, but the thing I want to get you to look at is the way the curve goes, thunk. It kind of does okay and then ends. Because products have life cycles, you introduce them, and because you're not sustaining them, they run out. Now, that's perfectly fine if you want to make the perfect nugget. If you want to make the thing that you're going to release and forget about, as long as you know that's what's going to happen, it's okay. You can plan. The alternative, and I'm a big fan of Subway Surfers, and I got to do a teeny-weeny bit of consultancy on it, so I love the Jacob and Simon. Don't get me wrong, I'm not claiming any credit at all. I just agreed with a few things their designers wanted to do, and they went from 6 million daily active users to something, I think it's currently 26 million daily active users. But this is a really, really interesting thing for me. Look at this chart here. It's ever so slightly still going up. Think about that. You release a game, it goes through its maturing phase, and it's still going up. Why would that happen? Well, you can't quite see it here, but there's this, I mean, again, I'm cherry-picking my data. I'm picking slides which illustrate my point, but they continually do releases. In fact, they do more than that. Every time you go on, there's something that feels live and current. That takes effort. I thought I'd also look at some alternatives. So here's a game which is free to play. Smash Hit. Anyone heard of Smash Hit? Smash Hit, anyone? It's worth checking out. It's a really beautiful game, isn't it? And it has one in-app purchase. That one in-app purchase is the ability to have a checkpoint. The reason that's important is because we all know what the ability to have a checkpoint is in a game. There is no kind of mystery about it. I don't have to guess what value it's going to give me. It's obvious value. And therefore, it's a very easy decision to decide to spend money on it. But it's still got this downward curve because there's no ongoing engagement in the game. It is beautiful. It has an obvious revenue point. But in terms of a sustainable business, it becomes clearly something which has a duration, has a shelf life. And then I thought I'd take another example. Here's a paid game, Warhammer Quest, one of my favorites as it happens. But then I am biased. I've been playing Warhammer since I was about 18, probably longer. What I find fascinating about it is it kind of started with that decline and then had a bit of a peak and it started growing, then another peak. And they've invested in it. So despite it being a paid game, they have continued to invest and continue to release material. Again, I'm cherry-picking data. This This is illustrative. Go check out the data for yourselves. Don't believe anything I say. I will be wrong. I'll probably be less wrong than most people, though. The important thing about this, they didn't release material regularly enough for my liking, but it showed the ability to continue managing and sustaining the experience of a game has a massive impact on how sustainable the experience is. So I thought, well, okay, let's try and understand why that should happen. And it comes down to an idea of how people decide to spend money. There's I can't remember the name of the marketing guy, but there's a traditional marketing piece of work which looks at consumer behavior as risk. The idea of being somebody who's going to buy something. And by the way, I don't just mean spend money. The act of making a download, even a free one, has an opportunity cost. You could be doing other things with your time, with your hard disk space, all this other stuff. So any decision to act is a risky behavior. And what's affecting that? Well, there are social issues. So what do other people think? If I do this, am I going to be exposing myself as an idiot because I bought the wrong thing? Am I going to get something I'm going to value? What's the consequences if I choose this over something else? What am I missing out on? And are there other needs that infect me? And that leaves players, again, you can't quite see it with the colours, the light, but they leave this anxiety about whether they act or not. That's no good. We want people to get access to our game. If it's free, we want as many people as possible. If it's paid for, we want as many people as possible. So how do we help them? Well, it seems that we need to give players permission to play. In fact, no, actually, that's not quite true. We need to give them the ability to give themselves permission to play or pay for our game. And not just up front, within the game experience, if it's a free-to-play game. What gives players permission to think that this game is worth spending money on? And there are lots of tensions behind that. Does the game give me social capital? Does it make me feel good about myself? Because when other people see what I have bought, I look great. I've bought the gold suit in PlayStation Home, which has the dollar bills coming out the pockets. This really exists, by the way. It costs $15, and I think in the first week they sold 100,000 of them. I think at the time it was the most profitable item we had on the service. So think about that, a gold suit with money coming out the pockets. Why would anyone buy that if it wasn't to show off? So let's not ignore showing off. But actually, the interesting thing is, as services evolve, showing off is only a tiny fraction of the influence. It's an important fraction. It magnifies people's willingness to spend money. But there's a really, really important thing, the expectation of delight. What does that mean? So there's a paper by Park and Lee in South Korea that looked at people's spending habits inside games. I recommend you check it out. I can't give you the citation off the top of my head. It's a bit complicated, but email me later and I'll send it to you. But they did what might seem a very obvious thing. They checked why people bought things in games. How many of you think that it would be a decision to buy something would be because we're happy in a game, that we like a game? Do you think, put your hand up if you think you'd spend money if you like a game? Do you? There's a couple of hands. No one spends money because they like a game. They spend money because they expect future value. So if I have a gold lame suit, it's not because I like it necessarily. It's because I think it's going to give me something. It might give me a wry smile. It might let me show off to my friends, but it is giving me some future value. And similarly, if I have say a tank game, and I buy something in the tank game that doesn't let me feel like I'm getting something for it, you're actually undermining the whole purpose. We'll get to play to win or pay to win later, but remember that. We need an expectation of value. We also get a lot of benefit from having this fear of missing out. If we're frightened of missing out on something, that can be a really important thing. A lot of games, particularly free-to-play games, get a bad rep because of this, though. Because there's a lot of games that seem, on the surface at least, I'm not saying they are, I'm not saying they're not, but a lot of games do seem to be playing on fear a lot. Oh, I've just lost this level, I've run out of moves, can I buy some more? Oh, I'm so close, I'm going to miss out on winning, therefore I'll spend my 50 cents, 69 cents, or whatever it is on getting a candy that will let me carry on for 5 more moves. I mean, I'm not saying that's evil, it's not evil, it's just a way of doing game design. But I worry that we start getting people feeling uncomfortable if we're only focusing on fear of loss. Then there's this word at the bottom, I'm not sure if you can read it, abnegation. So we can have all these goods, we can create a sense of expectation, a social value, fear of missing out. But if we don't give people a reason to feel they can set aside their other obligations in life, why would they spend time on your game? If your game doesn't make them feel comfortable, that they can just get on with it and it's okay, how are you going to do that? Because let's face it, we enjoy sitting there and wasting time. We genuinely enjoy that. But if we've got this nagging thought that we should be doing the washing up instead, and our game doesn't give us the permission to get on with playing, and instead makes us think more about the things we should be doing, it holds us back. And repeat users are actually less expensive than trying to buy a customer or trying to do all the effort to excite people and build brands that excite people. Because we have things like continued relevance. If we continually be relevant to players, they'll keep coming back. If we have this, again, fear of missing out, we're constantly updating the game. One of the things that Rovio did brilliantly in the early days of Angry Birds is they kept releasing new levels, kept releasing it. Doesn't matter if you spent any money, they just kept releasing new levels and new levels. You knew you had to come back because you've got to find the new level. Or the classic Farmville. I know Farmville's not the most popular game anymore and it's kind of gone, but actually the harvesting mechanic was quite interesting because I knew my goods were going to become available in 15 minutes, an hour the next day. So I had to come back, had to schedule time to come back and get it. It's actually an incredibly important mechanic that has become, not tainted, but kind of forgotten about, the value of that, because we spend so much time thinking about, well, we'll charge people for coming back late, or we'll charge people to get that satisfaction now, rather than thinking what the value of the fear of loss has to sustain their interest. Loyalty is important. Inertia is interesting. If you get people involved and engaged in your game, that will create a sense of inertia. But the assumption that this stuff is free, which a lot of people have, free to play is easy. We go free and that's it. No. This stuff takes effort. This stuff takes design up front. It requires support and maintenance. So repeat customers are not free. They're just cheaper than having to buy new customers every time. So if we're going to do something about that, we have to start by understanding players' needs. And I'm not going to go through all of this stuff. I've got a book out. You can quite happily read it. I think there's copies of these kind of slides around the web everywhere. But we have to think about the need state. So entertain me. Why should I trust you? Who else is playing the game? Can the player show off? These are the kind of need states that players have. And if you've ever seen someone talk about free-to-play, you'll have seen this chart in some form. We reduce the price and more people play it. That's great. It's not quite true. Well, it is true in itself, but it only applies to the first purchase. As soon as you get somebody into your game, it's a whole different curve. Because what happens is this idea that people have remorse when they buy things. Have you heard of the term buyer's remorse before? Does that make sense to you? So a few blank faces. So this idea, let's say I'm going to buy a new laptop. I get the laptop. It's really shiny and glossy. It's got a great big fruit symbol on it. I'm very excited. It's it's the latest, greatest thing. I want it. I'm going to spend my ridiculous amount of money on it. I get it. I open the box, and the box has a little shimmer as I pull it open. I'm still excited. But then I open it out, and I start running an app. And then I realize I can't resize the box, except on the bottom right corner. And I've got to move and shift and move. And suddenly, I can't use it the way I expected to, the way my previous device used to work. I'm now frustrated. I get a bit angry. I want to throw it in the bin. This expensive piece of tech that I've just got, I don't like anymore because I don't actually know everything about it yet. I haven't learned the tricks of using it. I haven't got complete knowledge of the benefits, but I do now have complete knowledge of the negatives. So all this anticipation I had is lost because I'm now engaged in using the device. And I'm not completely au fait with it. I'm having to learn how to use it. So it's going to take time for me to get to the point where I maximize my utility, the thing that I've got, the value of the thing that I've got, and truly become engaged with it and become a super fan. It takes time. There's a journey that's going on here. And the same thing, I argue, happens when I buy a game. I buy a game, I get excitement about it. Oh, let's say a game like, I don't know, how about Duke Nukem Forever? Anyone know Duke Nukem Forever? Okay, I'm not getting a hint that many people know. Duke Nukem was a classic game which a lot of us loved, and it was so bad. In fact, it only had to be bad and I'd have been satisfied. It was terrible. It was so awful, it killed Duke Nukem Forever. But my point with it is I had this anticipation. And then there is no illusion once you've got the thing. You've got no more space to imagine what the game will give you. You play a game like FTL, you know what you're expecting. It's got to delight. When you get it, you know exactly what it does. But then you've got to learn how the controls work. You've got to learn how you deal with the navigation, how you deal with the crew. All these things you have to learn. Now, if you've got a paid game, it doesn't matter what happens after the wall, because you've got people anticipating the value of your game. Well, it does matter a bit. It matters that people don't slag it off. It matters that people don't say nasty things about your game if you made it paid. But it doesn't really matter if people play it. If you have a free-to-play game, it really matters that people play it, because buying it is just the entry point. The real commercial model happens inside the experience. It happens as we engage. So if you've got a paid game, getting out of the buyer remorse is no problem because they've already invested. If you've got a free game, getting them out of the buyer remorse is hard because they've got nothing invested and your game is infinitely substitutable. There's now as much content out there, as much good content out there as I could play in my lifetime. You've got to give each player every reason to keep with your game at this early stage. And if you fail, you lose them. There's this model called the Chasm, written by a guy called Geoffrey Moore, I think in 1980, 1990, something like that, I can't remember. 80s, 90s anyway. He looked at the way technology products were being adopted. And you have this idea of you introduce your product or service, you have this growth phase, it matures and then declines. But then he noticed that the different types of people were buying those products at different stages. So you had the people who adopt early, and then the early majority, and then late majority and laggards, sort of latecomers. The interesting thing is the guys who were the early adopters were not the same type of people as the early majority. The early adopters were generally people who were tech savvy, who understood what the service could give. They were quite forgiving. The early majority needed hand-holding, they needed looking after, they needed explanation, they needed a lot more involved support. What's interesting about that for me is that the needs of these guys is very different from the needs of these guys. But it's only when you get to these guys that you start making a profitable experience. We had the same problem in games, I would argue. We have a different way of looking at it, though. So rather than talking about it in general segments, saying there are early adopters, what I've noticed through 15 years of doing game services is that actually players go through a life cycle. And they start by discovering your game. They then learn that buyer remorse point where they come out of the buyer remorse and start valuing your experience. They start learning about how your game works. Most importantly, where your game fits into their life cycle. Then, and only then, do they start engaging. And if you don't help them go from that learning stage to being truly engaged, you lose them, they fall down the chasm. Now, to deal with that, we've got to deal with the fact that they've got life cycle, And to understand that, we need to know what the data says about them. What is it? We have to actually start calculating based on real information. That's not just asking people, although asking people is really important. It's only through focus groups we kind of get the sense of the right questions to ask. But you can't trust people to answer correctly. Now, they will answer honestly, don't get me wrong. My favorite example of this is when we launched 3 in the UK, we asked people what was the most important thing that we could bring them as a 3G phone. And we had video calling. You could phone people up and do a video call. And everybody who's demoed this said, this is the single most important, exciting thing I've ever seen. Let's make that the most highest priority thing to talk about. When was the last time you made a video call on your mobile phone? Come on, everyone must do it now, surely. Last week, you did it last week? FaceTime. Yeah. But my point is that we do it very rarely. It's spontaneous, it's momentary. The reason that they all thought it was great is because they didn't have to face up to the real situation when you were trying to make those calls. Have you had a 45-minute call with your boss on a video call? Every week when I was at 3. Staring your boss in the eye as you tell them what your sales numbers are is an extremely intimidating experience for him as well as me. And, I'm not saying I have to put makeup on, but, people don't always like to see what their faces look like on screen. It's a whole bunch of reasons. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is you both had to have a phone that could do it. You both had to be in the right coverage area. And you both had to know that you wanted to do it. Unless all of those things lined up, unless all of the stars lined up, you didn't do it. So that causes problems. So knowing the right questions to ask matters, and that requires not just data, raw mechanical data, what people do, not just qualitative information, i.e. asking people how they feel, but actual insight based on experience and rigorous, dedicated understanding of what you're trying to deliver. It needs you to have a distinctive vision. Vision's incredibly important. Without it, we can't know what we're trying to make. The really interesting thing for me is that design doesn't start until you have a vision, I think. Because if you haven't got a vision, you've got nothing to communicate. If you haven't got a vision, no one's going to be looking for what you have to say. So that's why I'm not a big fan of copycats, because if you're not adding something to the language of game designing, what you deliver, why are you doing it, and why would an audience care? There's a whole bunch of other stuff we should talk about. We haven't got time, but we should talk about the rhythm of play. If you start realizing your game is a service, our design has to change. It has to accommodate the fact that we've acknowledged that players are going to have life cycles, and that matters to us. And if they have life cycles, we're going to deal with their needs as they need it. So we've got to realize we've got 6 seconds to start, minutes to get a meaningful moment, getting to play a second or third time. And these are critical stages. And we have to have our mechanics. This lighting really doesn't work for my slides, but never mind. We've got to have context in which those mechanics take place, something that gives us a sense of purpose, a sense of progression, to play more than once or twice. Why are you going to keep coming back and play 100 times, 100 days? And then building into that this idea of a metagame. Now, the way I look at metagames is a bit different from some people. I think of it as the way the real world collides with the gaming experience. It's not what you draw as pixels. It's what the pixels do to us when we're in a real world. The example I love is a game by a friend of mine called Alistair Aitchison. It was a Slamjet Stadium, it's called. It's basically an air hockey game. And you have pucks, and you have to get the ball into the hole nice and easy. Except when you realize that the iPad has no idea who's hitting whose pucks. And as soon as you realize that, you shove your friend out the way, and you start taking over the whole tablet, and basically it turns into a wrestling match. You did not design a wrestling match, you've created one by circumstance. Realizing that, this is thinking of that kind of thing as the design of a negative space. You don't design just the game. You have to design the context in which the game is played. And that's when services start becoming real. That's why you think about socialization of games. If I can build a social community around my game, why would they care? More importantly, if somebody, say, posts a video of this magical bit of gameplay, it's not just a case of why would somebody want to post it. Why would their friends care to watch it? If you don't think about that, you haven't fully realized the potential of your game design. And that's where the metagame comes in. Now, we could talk about pay to win. Again, I don't want to go too long because I know that we haven't got a huge amount of time. But there's an argument that free-to-play can break games, and it's true. But if you build a game that has pay to win, what you've done is broken your game. That doesn't mean that free-to-play is wrong. It means you've thought too linearly about how you're going to sell things. Oh, I'm going to sell someone the golden bullet that would automatically destroy your enemy. Well, that's just dumb, because you've just made the game boring for everybody who doesn't have the golden bullet. Oh no, wait, you've made the game boring for the guy who bought the golden bullet, because you've just broken the game. So pay to win is a bit of a lie. It's a bit of an argument that's raised to say that free-to-play is wrong, rather than realizing it's an argument that you shouldn't break your game. There are better ways of dealing with it. And that means thinking about monetization as a design task and realizing there is a balance between gameplay, narrative, assuming your game is a narrative. Actually, I think every game is narrative in some way. Even if that narrative is abstract or simplified, even if it's just the journey of the player. Think about Tetris. I think Tetris has a story. In fact, actually, in the original Tetris, I believe there was a story where if you got to a certain level, you actually stopped the aliens destroying the Kremlin or something. I can't remember exactly. But if you think about it, there is a narrative inherently in the Tetris game. Tiles come down of different shapes. I place them correctly or not. If I place them correctly and clear a line, I have a momentary sense of relief. I offset the inevitable doom. But then the doom continues. It keeps coming at me. And my job is to offset and push away, push back against the inevitable doom. That's a kind of journey. That's a kind of narrative story, as well as being a simplified mechanic. But monetization is also. All of these things are vectors between us and the player. And if these vectors don't line up, if you don't have your gameplay in line with your monetization, in line with your narrative, how can you create a service experience? And there's lots of things like uncertainty. So rather than just having, here's the bullet that kills people, well, why don't you have the scissor, the paper, the stone, the rock, the lizard, the Spock, whatever you want to call it. You have these different ways. If we use monetization as game design, it becomes easy. All of that's kind of so what, and with about sort of, 5 minutes worth of talk left, maybe a bit more, how much have I covered in terms of how the challenge of service? Probably not a huge amount. So let's try and speed our way through that. If you're going to make a service now, you will be told by lots of people who've got large established services that it's impossible for indies to do this. That it's impossible to get started, so don't bother. Again, that's not quite true. It is a massive challenge. However, if we identify the bits that are doable, if we actually plan the way that we design our games so that we do collect data, that we can use simple data posting, but we can create logic structures that can be scalable. There are huge amounts of tools out there, off the shelf, that allow us to grow with our audience. We can adapt instantaneously. We can develop in an agile way. One of the things that I've always found really hard to do, because I've been a product owner for 15 years running services, I've always found it really hard to simplify until it comes down to the point where I dedicate actual coding resource. There's a technique I use, which is basically absolute prioritization. It's, you have a priority list, but there's only one item at number 1, there's only one item at number 2, and you break down all the things you want to do and put it into a long list from top to bottom. When you do that, you are forced to make really tough decisions. But more importantly, you can also take out your really darling, the bits of the experience you'd really love to do, but you know aren't really that important, but you'd love to do them. So what you do is you put them later. You put them into later releases. You create a program with these tentpole releases that allow you to continue an experience over time. So you build a single hypothesis, a minimum awesome product, and listen to that audience. Listen to that audience, and then update relentlessly. If you can update every day, do it. Now, okay, that's a bit tough. You wouldn't update the whole code every day. But one thing we learned is when we had, at 3, we had our charts, and we had all this kind of stuff. I got rid of charts because I found that they were actually reducing my income. Instead, we did top buy games, top rent games, all this kind of thing. And when we started out, we were updating every week. And then we moved to updating every day. And then we moved to updating every 4 hours. Guess what the average time of return for an active user was when we moved to updating every 4 hours? It was 4 hours. People came back as often as we updated. So planning updates, not just the functional ones. You might do a functional update every month, maybe. You might do a content update every 2 weeks, maybe. But there's nothing to stop you doing events throughout the day. There's nothing to stop you doing notifications and special activities targeted around player performance every 20 minutes, programmatically. Make people feel your game is alive, but let's not kill ourselves in doing it. Let's plan a pipeline of activity. The other thing that's really important is being able to deliver predictable surprises. I don't know if you know this guy. There's a TV series called Columbo. Possibly one of the finest TV series ever made, although it is very dated now. Here was a murder mystery where the opening scene is the guy who did the murder doing the murder. We see who did it. We don't have to guess who did it. A whodunit where we know who did it. And then along comes Peter Falk, this bumbling fool of a detective who asks all the wrong questions, is really stupid and is smoking a cigar, until about 5 minutes before the end of the program, he would say the immortal lines, "Just one more thing." He would ask the murderer, who he's already talked to 4 or 5 times, this stupid inane question, say, "Just one more thing." And then he will tell you not just who did it, we know who did it, but why they did it and how he worked it out. That's the thing we want to hear. We don't really care about the murder because we know what happened, but we care about how Columbo fixes it. Creating predictable surprise in your game, knowing that in 6 weeks' time there's going to be this update, knowing in 4 weeks' time there's going to be this content release, knowing that if I continue coming back tomorrow, I'm going to get these bonuses, knowing that if I am going to talk to my friend, I will get something that will help make my game more exciting. How are you going to build that into your experience? That's the heart of services. It's putting your player first and thinking about their long-term experience with your game and preparing for the life cycle. Because really the difference between a paid game and a service game. If we have a paid game, we have to expect that our one guy is going to give us our $100,000 or whatever it is. But if we have our social experience, we have our service experience, I can spread out the access to these things. I can find ways of generating a wider audience. But that only happens when we build a foundation for scale. That only happens where we build only where we know there's revenue. We only want to build where we know that we can have a sustainable experience. So we build small, we try things, we fail fast, we fail early. The lean startup as a service suddenly becomes really interesting because every release we make is a hypothesis. Everything that we reveal, we test, we try, we adapt, we learn. We build games for our fans. And our fans are the best marketing in the world. Our fans are the ones who care. Our fans are the ones who will attract an audience, who will sustain and retain an audience, who will provide the inertia, the loyalty, the lust, the desire, the joy. And our games as a service become truly fulfilled, where ironically they become least important, where our games become a vehicle for our players to communicate with each other. But we have to make a great game first to build this audience, to show them that we care about them in our game, to show them that we can actually listen to their needs. And they're going to tell us some stuff we don't want to do and shouldn't do. But we have to know at our heart what's going to actually delight them and deliver ongoing value. And that's the challenge of building games as a service. It's not easy, but the rewards are enormous. Because if you truly love your game, if your game truly has a repeatable and ability to sustain an audience, if your game really has those things, then not building a service is a massive mistake. So that's really it. And just so you know who I am, other than just this strange guy in a hat with an English accent, I'm Every Play Evangelist, which is Every Play is a company that was bought by Unity. Well, Applify is a company bought by Unity about 10 weeks ago, maybe, just before GDC. We have a gameplay recording SDK, so you can put it in your game. It's a Unity plugin, obviously. We also support Cocos and various other things. But you can allow players to share the magic moments of their experience playing your game with their friends. And watching a video of your friends playing something is meaningful and also helps me discover content I might otherwise have missed. We also have an amazing video ad network, which is... Video ads are really interesting, particularly opt-in. When players who have been experiencing your game as free, some people call them freeloaders. I quite like freeloaders. It kind of feels like I'm a pirate, I'm a buccaneer, I'm a freeloader. But some people think it's a negative term. But let's say it's positive. We need free players. Free players are great. Without free players, we don't have an audience willing to spend money. But we're not getting any revenue from them. And they cost us money because we've got to manage our servers. Well, if you give them an opt-in video ad, so they willingly watch an ad and get in-game currency, not only do we entertain them with a video of a game, and we might get some money for that, but the in-game currency they get, they already know has some monetary value because they know you're getting money out of the ad. And then when they decide to spend that money in the game, they value the things that they buy. So it's an opportunity to retain as well as generating users. And as I said, we were bought by Unity, which is a fantastic thing for me. I've been a Unity fan for a very long time, so it's an awesome experience. There is an opportunity on the Unity stand here to win a pro license. There is a QR code on the stand over there, so don't have to worry about trying to use it here. And with that, hopefully I haven't gone too far over. Open up for any questions. If you're interested, though, also recently produced a book called Games as a Service. I have a couple of copies here if anyone's interested. And there are my contact details. So any questions, I'll happily answer. I mean, like I say, you can grab me afterwards. I'm going to be around all day. The bottom line is if you're not thinking about your game as a service, you're going to be causing yourself problems. Because even if you're successful making a product, you'll be losing opportunity of building audiences and building revenue if you haven't thought about how you're going to support it on an ongoing basis. And all of these things apply if you're going to do that. Okay. Thanks a lot.
I wanted to ask if your book is available also, for example, in Amazon.
Yeah,
like
so the book's available on Amazon. It's on Focal Press's site, Routledge.com. It's on Kobo. It's on iBooks. It's everywhere. So, yeah.
Great.
Enjoy.
So, thank you very much, Klaus.
Thank you.
Okay.